All right, guys. Since we're not meeting for class in person, I wanted to give you guys a video lecture going over Chapter 3, Objective 1. Hopefully by Thursday we'll be back in class. It's very possible that we won't be based on the weather reports for Wednesday and Thursday. So if for whatever reason we are not back in class, uh, we'll have a video lecture for Objective 2. Uh, since all of you guys haven't taken your test yet, Uh, we will go over our test at some point once everybody's taken it. So know that's coming. You'll be able to figure out kind of what you missed, ask questions based on that. But for today, I want to go over Chapter 3, Objective 1. So in Chapter 2, we looked at job process or job cost systems. So each job was different. Each job had different costs that make it up. In Chapter 3, we're going to look at a process cost system. We're going to kind of explain what that is, kind of how it's different than a job cost system and how it's similar. And so this opening example that it gives us. So in making ice cream, think about making ice cream, okay? If you make it at home, you need certain ingredients. If you make it in a factory, you need certain ingredients. So in making ice cream, an electric ice cream maker is used to mix ingredients. So the ingredients are sugar, milk, cream, and then whatever flavoring that you want to flavor it with. All right, so once you have those ingredients mixed, then you actually have to freeze the ice cream. And to do that, you have to pack the mixer with salt and ice. Okay, so if we put all those things in there, I don't know if you guys have ever made homemade ice cream. It's one of our favorite things to do in the summer. But you put the milk, the cream, the flavoring, the sugar in there. Then you pack it with ice and salt, and after 30, 40 minutes, you get frozen ice cream. But, like the sentence right here says, after mixing for half of the required time, if you cut it off early, would you have ice cream? No, you wouldn't, because the mixer has to run for a certain amount of time for the ice cream to freeze. All right, so think about this. What cost have we incurred so far in making ice cream? You've incurred the cost of the materials, the milk, the cream, the sugar, the flavoring, the ice, and the salt. Okay? It says the answer to this question requires knowing the cost of those ingredients plus the cost for electricity. All right, so those ingredients were added at the beginning. So all of those ingredient costs have been incurred. You can't pull the milk out once you put it in. You can't pull the flavoring out once it's been added. This is assuming that we cut it off halfway through. Okay, so all those materials costs are already incurred. But because the mixing is only half complete, only 50% of the electricity would have been incurred. So if we cut it off halfway, what cost have we incurred? It would be all the materials cost, but only half of the electricity cost. All right. So then you think about that on a larger scale, and it talks about these same concepts apply to large ice cream processes like Edie's and Nestle and things like that. So instead of mixing in a little uh, family size ice cream maker, they're making these things in huge multi-thousand gallon vats. So for them to do that, they've got to record the cost of the ingredients, the cost of the labor, and then the factory overhead that is used in making ice cream. Okay? So these costs are very important because managers use them to determine, do we need to keep making a certain flavor? Is there a way that we can lower the cost on these things? Because of how much cost is involved, how do we price this ice cream? So there's lots of tools and decisions that come from these processes. Okay, and that's what we're going to look at in this chapter. So let's look at 3-1. Okay, so what is a process manufacturer? So process manufacturer produces products that are indistinguishable from each other using a continuous production process. All right, so now you think about an oil refinery. All right, and an oil refinery, their end goal is to produce a barrel of gasoline. Okay, so if this oil refinery is working as it should, and we produce 50 barrels of gasoline, you wouldn't be able to choose any of them that look different than the other because the process is the same for each barrel of gasoline. Okay, so unless something happens, unless something changes, the process will be the same every single time. So you think about a paper company, you think about a food processor. Like if those things work correctly, then the process always stays the same. So if you can figure out the cost for the process, then you won't have to change it based on how many times you use it. Okay? So the cost accounting system that's used by these process manufacturers is obviously called the process cost system. All right, so process cost system records product costs for each manufacturing department or process. Okay, so just to kind of backtrack, in contrast, the job order manufacturer produces custom products for customers or batches of similar products. So, if you're an architect and you're drawing plans up for someone's house, each house that you draw up is going to be different. So each plan that you draw up is most likely going to cost different amounts, okay? Because each item is unique to itself. When compared to a process cost system, the process is the same for each and every barrel of gasoline that we use, okay? So let's compare the job order and the process cost system. All right, so how are they similar? Okay, so the process and the job order cost system are similar because they record and summarize product costs. So, the end goal is to have a cost for the products that we make, whether they're all the same, like oil, or whether they're each individually different, like custom houses. Okay, the end goal is the same, which is to record and summarize product cost. They all three have the same types of cost: direct materials, direct labor, factory overhead. Both systems, process and job costing, are going to allocate factory overhead to the products, to the end products. They're all going to use a perpetual inventory system for materials, work in process, and finished goods. In accounting, this semester we talked about a perpetual inventory system versus periodic. For these type of businesses, it only makes sense for them to use a perpetual inventory system, which means every time inventory is bought or sold, a journal entry is made. So at any time, you know exactly how much inventory you have on hand, and you can track it very thoroughly. All right, and then lastly, each system provides useful product cost information for decision making. So, for the job order costing, we looked at guitars and the process to make an individual guitar and how they can be different. For the process cost system, we're going to look at a company called Frozen Delight. All right, so they're going to be making ice cream. It's going to be the same process each and every time. So it should be very easy for us to be able to distinguish between process cost and job order cost. Okay, so job order costing for Legend guitars, we see direct materials, direct labor, and factory overhead all equal to a finished good. In the process cost system, and we're going to discuss this more, but the direct materials go into the mixing department where it's added with direct labor and factory overhead. Then it gets moved to the packaging department where there's more direct labor and more factory overhead and more direct materials. Then from there, it goes into finished goods. So that's where some of the differences will come into play. Okay, so Frozen Delight manufactures ice cream. They use two departments, a mixing department and a packaging department. The mixing department mixes the ingredients, obviously. That's easy to see. And the packaging department is going to take the mixed goods and package them to be able to send out to customers. So because each gallon of ice cream is similar, product costs are recorded in each department's work in process account. So that means the mixing department's going to have work in process, and the packaging department is going to have work in process as well. All right, so Frozen Delight, which is the company we're looking at, would record the cost of making ice cream in work in process accounts for both of those departments, for the mixing and the packaging department. So the product cost of making 1 gallon of ice cream would be what? So when we think about direct materials, you would have milk, cream, sugar, and then also the cartons that the ice cream will go in. So all material costs are added at the beginning of the process for both the mixing department and the packaging department. So remember, once we mix the goods, the milk, the sugar, the flavoring, you can't pull them out. So once they're mixed, they're in. So all those product costs, all those direct material costs are entered at the beginning. All right, then each department would have direct labor costs, which would be employees that run the mixers, that run the packaging systems, and then obviously you're going to have factory overhead for both departments. You have factory overhead for the mixing department and the packaging department. All right, so the mixing obviously has to go first. So when the mixing department completes their process, all of their product costs are transferred to the packaging department. So none of the cost will stay with the mixing department. They'll all transfer to the packaging department. And when the packaging department completes its process, those product costs would be transferred to finished goods, because obviously now you would have ice cream that's ready to sell to a customer. All right, so in this way, the gallon of ice cream is continuously having value added, and it's continually having cost added to the process. And if you want to contrast that to the Legend guitars, they just have product cost by job and use one job sheet for each job. And then there's just one work in process account for that one job. There's one finished goods account for that one job. And then as each job is completed, they transfer it to finished goods. So when you think about the job order cost system and work in process, so the work in process at the end of the period would be the sum of the job cost sheets for any job that's not completed. So all the partially completed jobs would make up work in process. In a process cost system, the work in process at the end of the period is the sum of the cost remaining in each department account. So it'd be whatever's left in the mixing department plus whatever's left in the packaging department. All right, so what about cost flows for a process manufacturer? So let's think about, the physical flow of materials for an ice cream company. So you have raw materials that go to the mixing department. The work in process is transferred to the packaging department. Once it leaves the packaging department, it moves to finished goods inventory, and then it gets sent out. All right, so in the mixing department, direct materials, which we've already said are milk, cream, and sugar, are placed into a vat. All right, the employee fills the vat. The employee sets the temperature on the machine. The employee sets the speed that the vat's going to mix. And then once the vat is finished mixing, it's cooled as the direct materials are mixed by agitators, like in a washing machine or a paddle. So when you think about factory overhead, you're going to have equipment depreciation, you're going to have electricity, and you're also going to have indirect materials. So once that's finished, then that whole process, or that whole group of direct materials that is now mixed ice cream, is moved to the packaging department. So in the packaging department, they receive the ice cream from the mixing department in a solid form that's then ready to be packaged. All right, so the packaging department, they're going to use direct labor. They're also going to use factory overhead. And then they're going to have the packages that the actual ice cream goes in. And once they finish, it's transferred to finished goods, where it's frozen and stored in refrigerators. Okay? So The cost flows in a process costing system are similar to the physical flow of materials. So part A, the cost of materials purchased is recorded in the materials account. Then after that, the cost of the direct materials, the milk, the sugar, the cream, is used by the mixing and packaging departments, and it's recorded in work in process for each department. Third, the cost of direct labor for each department is recorded. Fourth, the cost of factory overhead that's incurred for indirect materials and factory overhead like depreciation is recorded in each department. And then the factory overhead is applied to each department. Then they have to figure out the cost of units that were completed. And once a unit is completed, remember that unit is transferred to finished goods. And then once a good is sold, it's transferred to cost of goods sold. All right. Now, should the mixing department and the packaging department have the same factory overhead account? Well, no, they shouldn't, because each department is going to incur different amounts of factory overhead based on the processes that occur in each department. So it said as shown as in Exhibit 4, which is right here. The mixing and packaging departments have separate factory overhead accounts. The factory overhead cost incurred for indirect materials, for depreciation, for electricity and other overhead are debited to each department's factory overhead account. That overhead is applied to work in process by debiting each department's work in process and crediting factory overhead. So just like we did in a job costing system, when you apply overhead, you debit it to work in process and then credit the factory overhead account. Okay? So when we think about work in process, we're going to have different work in process accounts for each department. So you'd have one for mixing and one for packaging. Each work in process account is going to be debited for direct materials, for direct labor, and for applied factory overhead. So remember, in applied factory overhead, we used direct labor hours as our driver. Then also the work in process account for the packaging department is going to be debited for the cost of the units that are moved from the mixing department. So their cost, work in process costs, are going to be increased by the cost of the goods that move to them from the mixing department. And then lastly, Exhibit 4 showed that the finished goods account is debited for the cost of the units transferred from the packaging department. So the total cost that is included in making the ice cream would be transferred to the finished goods department. And then the finished goods account would be credited for the cost of the unit sold, obviously. So as you sell one, you would credit it out of finished goods, and then the debit to that journal entry would be to cost of goods sold. All right, so short video. I want you guys to go back and reread that. It's just basically the flow of goods in the process cost system. On Thursday, assuming we meet back in class, we'll pick up with objective number 2. If we do not meet back in class, I'll have another video lecture for this week. You guys have a homework assignment that is due, I believe, Thursday before class on objective 1. So you guys reread this chapter 3, objective 1. If you have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out to me. I'm here to help you guys. I hate that we're not meeting in class, but hopefully you guys are having fun and staying safe. I hope you guys have a great week.